Imagine sitting down to a gourmet lunch at one of the most exclusive restaurants in the city, Park Avenue Cafe, where deals worth millions are discussed over fine china and crystal glasses. Then suddenly, a 14-year-old boy bursts through the door and screams at a billionaire, "Don't eat that." In front of stunned diners, he knocks a spoon from the man's hand, accusing the billionaire's elegant young wife of trying to poison him. What follows is not just a confrontation, it's a psychological chess match between a sharp young mind and a woman hiding a deadly secret. In this gripping story, Malik Carter, the son of a Navy SEAL, stands alone against wealth, power, and deception. But will anyone believe him? And what happens when the truth finally explodes in front of everyone? Stay with us until the end, you won't believe how this story unfolds. And if this tale moves you like it did us, don't forget to subscribe, leave a comment, and share your thoughts below. Malik Carter wasn't looking for trouble that day. He was just waiting for the city bus after school, his backpack slung over one shoulder, when something in the corner of his eye caught his attention. Through the tall glass windows of Park Avenue Cafe, a place where people like him were never seen dining, he spotted something that made his blood run cold. A beautiful woman in a red silk dress, seated at the most exclusive table in the room, had just taken a small bottle from her purse and poured a clear liquid into a steaming bowl of soup. Her name was Vanessa Calloway, and she was married to billionaire real estate mogul Richard Calloway, nearly 3 decades her senior. Nobody else seemed to notice, but Malik saw everything. He didn't have time to think, only to act. And with nothing but instinct and courage, he ran into the restaurant and stopped Richard from taking that fatal bite. What happened next was like stepping into a courtroom with no jury and all odds stacked against him. As soon as Malik cried out and knocked the spoon away, the entire cafe went silent. All eyes turned, not to the suspicious woman, but to the black teenage boy in a public school uniform. Vanessa immediately painted him as a liar, calling him a street kid, a nobody looking for attention. Her voice was calm but condescending, dripping with the assumption that no one would believe someone like him over someone like her. And at first, it worked. The wealthy diners, the polished waitstaff, even Richard himself, all looked at Malik with suspicion. Because in that space, Malik wasn't seen as a brave young man. He was just another black kid causing a scene. This moment, tense, raw, and painful, laid bare the reality of racial prejudice. Malik had seen a crime in progress and acted heroically, yet he was treated as the threat. Vanessa weaponized her beauty, her wealth, and her whiteness against him, knowing that in a place like Park Avenue Cafe, perception is power. She didn't need evidence. She had status. But Malik had something stronger, the truth. And as the pressure built, as Richard began to question what he saw in his wife's eyes, the tide slowly turned. This wasn't just about poison in a bowl, it was about the poison of prejudice in society. About how easily we believe the worst of someone based on the color of their skin, and how hard it is for truth to break through layers of bias. Malik Carter didn't just save a man's life that day, he forced an entire room of elites to confront their assumptions. And as this extraordinary story continues to unfold, you'll see how one act of courage not only unmasked a killer, but also shattered the illusions that power and privilege are always right. Stay with us, because what comes next will change everything. If this story speaks to your heart, don't forget to subscribe, leave a comment, and let us know your thoughts. Malik Carter stood firm in the center of Park Avenue Cafe, his voice shaking but unwavering as he declared what he saw: Vanessa Calloway had poisoned her husband's soup. But instead of applause for his bravery, he was met with cold stares, whispered judgments, and condescending smirks. His words were true, but in that upscale restaurant, where tailored suits and diamond bracelets spoke louder than truth, Malik's skin color and school uniform made him an easy target for disbelief. He wasn't one of them. And for many in the room, that was all they needed to dismiss him. Vanessa leaned into the moment like a seasoned manipulator. With a flawless smile and the practiced grace of someone used to being believed, she played the role of the insulted wife. "Are you really going to let some street kid ruin your meal?" she asked Richard with icy amusement. The phrase, street kid, hung in the air like a slur. Malik clenched his fists, not out of fear, but out of quiet fury. He wasn't from the streets. His father, Colonel Marcus Carter, was a decorated Navy SEAL who had instilled in him a deep sense of honor and courage. But none of that mattered in the eyes of these wealthy strangers. All they saw was a young black boy stepping out of line. It wasn't just disbelief Malik was up against, it was centuries of racial bias condensed into a single moment. Had a white child stormed into that cafe and said the same thing, would the reaction have been different? Would the guests have paused longer before casting judgment? Vanessa knew the answer. That's why she doubled down, ridiculing Malik, making his accusations sound like the wild claims of a child looking for attention. And the saddest part? For a moment, it worked. The room grew colder, not because of doubt in Malik's story, but because of who was telling it. Malik saw it clearly, the way some guests looked at him like he didn't belong. The subtle flinch of the waiter when he stepped forward. The uneasy glances between guests. They weren't just questioning his story, they were questioning his right to even be there. That's the weight of racism, not always loud or violent, but silent, suffocating, and ever-present in the background of how people are perceived. But Malik refused to back down. "If she didn't do anything," he said, his voice clearer now, "why won't she eat the soup?" The question hit the room like a lightning bolt. Vanessa's silence said everything. In that instant, the veil of her privilege began to tear. Richard Calloway, long blinded by affection and comfort, finally saw what Malik had seen, fear, not of being wrongfully accused, but of being caught. Malik didn't just confront a murder attempt, he challenged a social system that instinctively sides with the powerful, the polished, and the white. His stand was about more than soup, it was about truth demanding to be heard, even when spoken by someone the world too often ignores. And the battle had only just begun. Stay with us to see how courage continues to shine through even the darkest prejudice. Don't forget to subscribe, comment your thoughts, and join us as this story unfolds. The weight of Malik Carter's words hung heavy in the air. If she has nothing to hide, let her eat the soup. It was a bold challenge, one that pierced the elegant illusion Vanessa Calloway had so carefully constructed. And in that moment, all her charm, her beauty, her money, they couldn't shield her from the truth. She hesitated. She laughed nervously. But she didn't touch the spoon. And that was the beginning of her unraveling. Still, the room remained divided. Some whispered that Malik was a troublemaker. Others questioned how a boy, especially a black boy, could possibly know what he claimed. Vanessa saw the shift and made one last desperate move. "Why does anyone believe him?" she snapped, standing tall in her red silk dress like a queen defending her throne. "He's just a kid. He has no proof. He could be lying. Maybe he wants money." That accusation was more than personal, it was racial. She didn't need to say it outright. The implication was clear, Malik wasn't credible because of who he was and where he came from. And once again, she relied on the age-old stereotype, that a young black male must be scheming, must have an angle, must be up to no good. She turned the suspicion back on him, hoping to plant seeds of doubt in the minds of those watching. This was a scene America knows too well, a confident white woman weaponizing her perceived innocence against a young black male, counting on society's instinct to protect her and doubt him. The parallels to real-life injustices weren't lost on anyone paying attention. Malik wasn't just fighting for the truth, he was pushing back against a system that had failed people like him for generations. But Malik didn't flinch. He didn't lash out or retreat. He stood his ground with a calm, quiet strength. "I don't want anything," he said clearly, looking right at Richard Calloway. "I just want the truth to matter." That sentence cracked the last piece of Richard's disbelief. The billionaire, now visibly shaken, picked up the soup bowl, but not to eat. He simply studied it. Then he looked at his wife, really looked at her, and saw something that terrified him more than poison: deception. When the police arrived, it was Malik's voice that rang out first, pointing to the bowl and repeating what he saw. Vanessa's facade crumbled. She screamed. She panicked. And finally, she confessed in a fit of rage. Her words were venomous, blaming Richard, society, and even Malik for ruining everything. But it was too late. The truth had pierced through her lies, and the handcuffs clicked shut. That moment, when a wealthy, white woman was exposed and held accountable because a young black boy refused to be silenced, was more than justice. It was a rare and powerful reversal of a story too often told in the opposite direction. And Malik Carter? He didn't just stop a murder. He stood tall in a room that tried to shrink him, and proved that courage and character will always speak louder than prejudice. Keep watching, because what happens next is just as life-changing. If this story moved you, please subscribe, leave a comment, and share your thoughts below. As Vanessa Calloway was led out of the cafe in handcuffs, screaming and resisting, the crowd of diners remained frozen, stunned by the surreal transformation of a woman they had once admired. Just minutes earlier, she was the epitome of class and grace; now she stood exposed as a would-be murderer. Her elegant red dress, once a symbol of refinement, now clung to her like a costume that could no longer hide the truth. But what pierced through the silence even deeper was her final outburst: "You'll all regret trusting him." She pointed at Malik Carter, her voice filled with venom. That one sentence hit like a slap across the face, not just to Malik, but to everyone who had watched the scene unfold. Even in the face of arrest, Vanessa clung to her last weapon, discrediting the black boy who had saved a life. Her words echoed with the bitter undertones of racism, a last-ditch effort to redirect blame and play the victim. It wasn't just a denial of guilt. It was a classic deflection, steeped in the ugly legacy of white womanhood weaponized against black youth. The pattern was all too familiar. Throughout American history, the voices of young black men have been silenced, their credibility questioned, and their character attacked, all to protect the comfort of the privileged. Malik Carter's experience in that upscale cafe mirrored stories that have played out in courtrooms, neighborhoods, and institutions for decades. But this time, things were different. This time, the truth wasn't buried, it was undeniable. Vanessa's confession had ripped the mask off not only her intentions but also the quiet biases that lingered in every judgmental glance Malik had endured. Still, the damage of those biases wasn't erased by a pair of handcuffs. As Malik stood there, he felt the emotional weight settle in his chest. He had been right, but he had also been alone. Surrounded by people who saw his skin before they saw his courage. It wasn't just the threat of Vanessa's manipulation that he fought. It was the silent disbelief in the room. The skepticism born from generations of prejudice. And yet, there he stood, unchanged in conviction, unwavering in presence. Not seeking praise, not asking for anything in return. That's what made him powerful. Not his size, not his words, but his refusal to let a lie become truth, no matter who was telling it. Richard Calloway, still seated at the table, looked at Malik with something deeper than gratitude. It was awakening. For a man who had lived in a world of polished surfaces and quiet privilege, that moment cracked something open. He saw, not just Vanessa for who she really was, but himself. His own assumptions, his own blind spots. In that space, surrounded by people of wealth and influence, it wasn't power or money that brought justice. It was the courage of a boy society was ready to overlook. Malik Carter proved that sometimes the most powerful voice in the room comes from the one you least expect. And his story was far from over. Stay with us, because what happens next will restore your faith in what's right. Don't forget to subscribe, leave your thoughts in the comments, and share this story with someone who still believes the truth matters. After the chaos settled and Vanessa Calloway was taken away, the opulence of Park Avenue Cafe no longer seemed so grand. The chandeliers still sparkled, the fine silverware still gleamed, but the illusion of perfection had shattered. And in the middle of that broken image stood Malik Carter, a 14-year-old black boy who had done what no one else in the room dared to do. He didn't just save a billionaire's life, he confronted the deeply embedded racial bias that almost silenced the truth. Richard Calloway sat in stunned silence, his once assured demeanor replaced by something more human: grief, confusion, and humility. He looked across the table not at a hero in a cape, but at a teenage boy in a wrinkled school uniform who had just risked everything to save him. Richard had spent a lifetime surrounded by lawyers, advisors, and power-hungry elites, yet none of them had ever spoken with the honesty that Malik had shown that day. When Richard finally spoke, his voice was low and hoarse. "You saved my life." But Malik, uncomfortable with the spotlight, simply nodded. He didn't need applause. He didn't need validation. What he needed, what he wanted, was for someone like Richard to finally see him. Not just as a boy from the other side of town. Not as a troublemaker. But as a human being with a voice that deserved to be heard. And Richard did see it. For the first time in years, he wasn't looking at wealth or status, he was looking at character. He asked Malik to sit with him, to talk. As they did, Richard's understanding of the world began to shift. He listened not only to the story of what had just happened, but to Malik's background, his father, Colonel Marcus Carter, a Navy SEAL who raised his son with discipline and moral clarity. Malik didn't act for attention. He acted because he was raised to do what was right, even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard. In that moment, Richard made a decision that would change both their lives. He offered Malik a full scholarship to one of the most prestigious private schools in the city. But it wasn't charity, it was recognition. Malik had already proven his worth. This opportunity wasn't a gift, it was a platform for someone who had already shown the courage that many adults never find. Still, even as Richard extended this life-changing gesture, the racial gap between them loomed. Malik was aware of it. So was Richard. Because Malik knew that in any other circumstance, if Vanessa hadn't confessed, if Richard had chosen not to believe, he could have walked out of that cafe branded a liar, a thug, or worse. That's the reality black boys in America know too well: one wrong assumption, and the truth becomes irrelevant. But on this day, the truth did win. And for Richard Calloway, that realization was humbling. He hadn't just been saved from poison. He'd been saved from his own blindness. And for Malik, this was only the beginning of something far greater. Stay with us, the journey ahead is one you won't want to miss. Don't forget to subscribe, comment, and share if this story touched your heart. Ban de Noi. Dua Veo Y Tom Tat So 6, He Viet Teep Cho Toa Don Van Dai 502 Bang Tiang On, Phu Hop Voi Van Hoa Mai Va Goi No La A6. Lu Y, Don Van A6 Phi Logic, Not Chuan Ve Tin Teet Voi Don Agioithu A1, A2, A3, A4, A5, 10 Kak Nan Vat Kung Phi Dong Not Voi Agioithu A1, A2, A3, A4, A5. Va Agioithu A1, A2, A3, A4, A5, A6 Ko the Gep Lai Ton 1 Don Content Lean Mok. Quan Trong, Tap Trung Veo Noi Dung, Fan Beat Chung Talk. Chat GPT de Noi. A 6. When Malik Carter walked through the gates of St. James Academy just weeks later, the contrast between where he came from and where he now stood could not have been more stark. The school, nestled among pristine lawns and Gothic-style stone buildings, was a world away from his public school in the inner city. Here, luxury was not only expected, it was assumed. The students arrived in chauffeured town cars, wore designer shoes, and carried custom monogrammed backpacks. Malik had earned his place through courage, but to many of his peers, he looked like an outsider. Whispers followed him down the hallways. That's the kid who saved Richard Calloway. Some said it with awe. Others with skepticism. and some with quiet resentment. Malik could feel the eyes on him, not just seeing his face, but measuring his difference. He was the only black student in most of his classes. And while no one said anything overtly racist, the message was loud and clear: you don't belong here. In lunchrooms and classrooms, Malik encountered a subtler form of racism, the kind that hides behind politeness, behind fixed smiles and exclusive cliques. Students asked if he was on a special scholarship. Teachers were surprised when he excelled. A group of boys from the student council cornered him one afternoon with veiled insults cloaked as curiosity. "So, you just happened to be at a billionaire's lunch that day?" one of them asked. "Must be nice to have Callaway as your golden ticket." They laughed, but Malik didn't. He had heard this tone before, doubt disguised as sarcasm, mockery masked as interest. Malik didn't respond with anger. He responded the only way he knew how, by showing up, staying focused, and being excellent. Every assignment he turned in, every answer he gave in class, was a quiet rebuttal to the assumption that he didn't deserve to be there. But that didn't mean the experience didn't wear on him. The daily mental toll of having to prove your worth in a space that was never designed for you, that's the part no one sees. And yet, through it all, Malik remembered his father's words: you don't need anyone to validate who you are. You walk with purpose. You are the proof. Those words became his armor. Because what Malik was facing wasn't just academic pressure, it was systemic bias built into the very walls of elite institutions. He knew the stakes. He knew that if he failed, it wouldn't just reflect on him, it would reinforce the narrative that people like him didn't belong. But Malik Carter didn't just belong. He earned his place. And slowly, quietly, even the most skeptical students began to notice. Not because Richard Callaway had vouched for him, but because Malik's integrity and resilience spoke louder than any endorsement ever could. Still, the fight wasn't over. In a world that too often judges by color and class, Malik's journey had just begun. And his presence alone was already rewriting the rules. Keep watching, because Malik's story isn't just about success. It's about breaking barriers built to keep people like him out. If you believe in that kind of change, subscribe, leave a comment, and share this story forward. Ban de noi. Dua veo y tom tat so 7, he viet teep cho toi don van die 502 bang tiang on, fu hop voi van hoa mai va goi no la a7. Lu y, don van a7 phi logic, not chuan ve tin teet voi don agioithu a1, a2, a3, a4, a5, a6.10 kak nan vat kung phi dong not voi agioithu a1, a2, a3, a4, a5, a6. Va agioithu a1, a2, a3, a4, a5, a6, a7 ko the gep lai ton 1 don content lean mok. Quan trong, tap trung veo noi dung, fan beat chung tok. ChatGPT de noi. A 7. As the months passed at St. James Academy, Malik Carter continued to walk a path few had traveled before him. His presence was a daily reminder that courage, not privilege, had earned him a seat among the city's elite. Yet despite his calm demeanor and academic success, Malik was still navigating the quiet, persistent weight of racial prejudice. He wasn't just the new kid. He was the black scholarship kid. And while no one dared say it outright, the way teachers hesitated before calling on him, or how students always seemed surprised when he aced exams, spoke volumes. One teacher, Mr. Bancroft, a long-tenured professor of economics, once said during class, "Some people land here through legacy. Others through merit. And sometimes, through luck." His eyes flicked toward Malik for just a second, but it was enough. The message wasn't lost on the class. It wasn't lost on Malik either. This kind of subtle undermining, coated in smiles and dressed up in plausible deniability, is a type of racism often ignored in polite circles. It doesn't scream. It whispers. It doesn't shove. It excludes. Malik endured it day after day, knowing he had to work twice as hard to be seen as equal. And that, in itself, was exhausting. But he refused to let the weight break him. Instead, he turned it into fuel. Malik began mentoring two younger students, both students of color, who had just received partial scholarships to St. James through the new Callaway Scholars Program, the very fund Richard Callaway had established after Malik saved his life. These boys, wide-eyed and nervous, reminded Malik of who he had been just months earlier. He didn't want them to feel alone like he once had. Through tutoring sessions in the library and quiet pep talks after class, Malik became a guiding figure, not just for them, but for other students who had also begun to question the unspoken hierarchy of the school. His presence, once seen as an anomaly, began to reshape the culture. Teachers who once doubted him now leaned in during discussions. Students who had kept their distance now asked to join his study group. Even Richard Callaway began to change. No longer the aloof billionaire, he began visiting the school quarterly, sitting in on classes, meeting with scholarship recipients, not for publicity, but to listen. He, too, was learning that true change doesn't come from grand gestures alone, but from consistent accountability. Still, none of this erased the reality Malik lived with, that the system wasn't built for boys like him. But he was determined to help rebuild it, brick by brick. Not for applause, but so the next boy who walked through those gates wouldn't have to prove his worth every day. Malik Carter wasn't just surviving at St. James, he was reshaping it. And if this story moved you, if you believe that courage can change culture, don't forget to subscribe, leave a comment, and share this story with someone who still believes in justice that sees no color. The story of Malik Carter reminds us that courage isn't reserved for adults in power, it can live in the heart of a 14-year-old who refuses to stay silent in the face of injustice. In a world where people are often judged by appearance, background, or skin color, Malik's bravery shows us the power of standing firm for what's right, even when no one is willing to believe you. His story challenges us to reflect, how often do we overlook someone's truth because of our own biases? And more importantly, would we have had the courage to speak up if we were in his shoes? If this story touched something in you, don't just scroll away. Like this video, leave a comment about what you would have done, and subscribe to our channel for more stories that go deeper than headlines. We tell real stories that speak to the heart, because voices like Malik's deserve to be heard.